Question number 10, Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Justice. Does she agree with Suzanne Snively from Transparency International that there is, quote, an awful lot of complacency, end quote, about corruption in New Zealand?
Honourable Judith Collins.
Mr Speaker, New Zealand has been named by Transparency International as being one of the least corrupt countries in the world for 8 years in a row. I agree with the reported comments. I also agree with the view that corruption requires dishonest intent or fraudulent conduct, similar to that of a trusted employee who steals from their employer.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does she think that this complacency is made worse by a government minister on a taxpayer-funded visit to China, manipulating her program to include the two directors of her husband's company, which happens to be a major donor to the National Party, into 3 events on that trip, and there not being any real sanction for that behaviour from the Prime Minister?
Order. Honourable Judith Collins.
Mr Speaker, I don't agree with that question, and the answer is no.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
How does the government contribute to reducing complacency about corruption when they have a minister who advocates for friends using ministerial letterhead, a minister who seeks to intervene with the police on behalf of a donor to the National Party, orchestrated taxpayer-funded visits to a husband's company, and are propped up by someone who has been described by Crown Law as having manipulated and engineered donations to avoid declaring them?
Honourable Judith Collins.
Mr Speaker, that last reference is to a matter that's before the court, and that member should know that that is quite out of order.
Supplementary question.
Question, Mr Speaker.
Grant Robertson.
Supplementary question. Try this one, Jerry. Noting her own ministry's fact sheet on bribery and corruption, which lists abuse of one's position of power as a form of corruption, is she concerned that 2 government ministers bullied the Maori Party into not changing their vote on the paid parental leave bill last night, despite this being the position of that party?
Order. I will hear from Jerry Brownlee before I rule, but those sort of allegations bring this whole House into disrepute. Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, Mr Tuaroa Flavel has very generously put out a statement making clear the circumstances that led to the confusion last night. I think for Mr Robertson to make those allegations here is completely out of order. It's somewhat typical, but completely out of order.
Order. And I'm ruling the question out of order.
Question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question. Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
How is it consistent with a government that says it wants to reduce corruption and increase transparency when its ministers are prepared to tell a Māori Party MP they have to vote against a bill that they have supported?
Order. I ruled the earlier question out of order. I'm doing the same on that one. Question number 11. Order.
Point of order.
Order. Now, I need to remind the House, or in case I need to remind the House, this is a point of order. It will be heard in silence.
Mr Speaker, I would ask why it is that I am unable to ask a question that is legitimately to the Minister of Justice about the question of corruption and bribery, and I quoted from a Ministry of Justice fact sheet that describes that as abuse of one's position of power, and I am not allowed to ask questions about ministers who bullied somebody last night.
Order. Member will resume his seat. The reason it was ruled out of order was because of the imputation that was contained in both questions. That is the end of the matter. Order. Question number 11, Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the